Chapter 20, October 8th. Jake interrupted my writing last night. He came in and sat on my floor, like he sensed my unease, like he wanted to comfort me instead of the other way around. He didn't look at me or touch anything in my room. He sat in the middle of the floor, cross-legged, shoulders hunched, head down, and the strange thing was, I did feel comforted, just by having him there. The voice of the stranger as he spoke to my mother had been taunting me. He told her that there was a descendant named Adura that could bend light to see around time, and she'd seen me. She'd seen what my future held. He told my mom that he wanted to take me away with him, that Adura had seen my future, and it wasn't good. But I was important. The stranger told my parents that he wanted to keep me safe. I had waited for Mom to tell him no, that she and Dad would protect me, but I peeked out the door and saw her face fall as she read from an old-fashioned scroll. She showed Dad, and he went pale. I couldn't see the stranger through the small crack of light, but I saw my mom nod and my dad put an arm around her. They were going to send me away, and I was afraid. I climbed out the window of my bedroom and ran. The baby is crying again, and Pat is calling for help. I will have to finish my story later, but I need to write it out. I need to remember exactly what happened so that these shadows in the dark step into the light, even if I have to die fighting them. Treadon Nelson. 48, 36, 15, hike. Treadon caught the football and backpedaled a few steps. He waited 2 heartbeats as the line surged forward. Jaron ran his route out to the side and back to the middle. Treadon let the ball fly. Jaron wrapped up the ball and barreled into the end zone. The play was perfect. The crowds rose to their feet. Another victory. Refs with their black and white striped shirts raised their hands, signaling the end of the game. A flood of high school students poured onto the field. The mad rush resembled a destructive wave of orange and blue, waving flags, painted faces, dyed hair. The deafening sound of victory filled the air as the other team retreated with their head down, skittering off the field. Treadon moved slowly back to the bench, enduring the back pounds, chest bumps, and butt slaps that erupted out of the milling melee of bodies at random from unknown sources. Jaron and another player managed to drench Coach Meyer in a shower of orange liquid from the cooler. Bridger Michaels went out of his way to hit Treadon with his shoulder as he headed for the locker room. If that was the most revenge Bridger had planned, Treadon could handle it. So far, Bridger and his friends had played their hardest on the field. They played like they wanted to win. 2 men, dressed in suits, made their way across the football field. They stopped in front of Jaron and put their hands out. Jaron shook their hands half-heartedly. One waved Treadon over. "You two played well. Good game. We'll be in touch." And then they walked away. "What was that about?" Rachel asked, helmet in hand. She squirted water into her mouth from her water bottle, swishing it around. "Those were scouts from Oregon," Jaron said, his eyes on the ground. No excitement in his voice. "My dad sent them." Treadon didn't think he needed his extra ability to see the disappointment in his friend. He found his mind wandering as he thought about the benefits of playing for Oregon. A scholarship, possibly a contract for advertisements, but it was so far away. And the plane tickets were expensive. He'd be leaving his mom alone. They cleaned up in the locker room and met back out on the field. Jaron moved slow, and they were the last people left as they walked back out onto the field. Jaron sat on the bleachers. Rachel approached, cleaned up in her school sweater and jeans. She took one look at Jaron and sat down beside him. "Do you want to go out for ice cream to celebrate the win?" Rachel's words seemed to be taken by the wind and flopped across the field like the wrappers left over from the game. They sat in silence, Treadon leaning against the railing. "I thought he saw more in me. I thought he saw me as more than a football player," Jaron said, looking up into the stadium lights. "I thought he was really starting to see me for who I am." Jaron kicked at an empty soda can. "People really should clean up after themselves." "I think Xander Calavan should clean up after himself." Rachel paused. "I found a lead. A guy who asked a lot of questions when XC Energy started up. He fell off the face of the earth for a while, but I think I found him." It was a statement and a question. Treadon wasn't sure why there was a question behind it, some kind of understanding between them. A threat? Jaron stared out at the field. There was a chorus of resounding booms as the lights shut off in sections around the field. "Are you being careful?" Careful? That wasn't a word Treadon expected from Jaron. "Yeah, I'll be careful. I'll let you know if I can get him to respond." Rachel stood, her energy renewed. "You're better than he is. You'll figure this out." She stretched and offered her hand to help Jaren up. I better get home. I don't think my ice cream excuse will last much longer. They walked out of the stadium and down the sidewalk toward the parking lot. At the corner of the school, 4 men stood outside the reach of the closest street lamp. They stood close together, talking quietly. Each man wore high-collared jackets that covered their necks and part of their chins. They were too shadowed for Treadon to read anything, but he made sure they walked Rachel to her car. Treadon glanced back but couldn't see the men anymore. He followed Jaren to his Aston Martin. Jaren scuffed his foot along the ground before unlocking the car. "Do you want to go for a drive?" Jaren asked. "I don't really feel like going home." "A drive? Just for fun." Treadon felt his anxieties skyrocket. It was just a drive. No reason to be afraid. He was inside the car, not in front of it. He tried to push the memory of his nightmare to the back of his mind. Sure, he sounded far more casual than he felt. He checked the time on the dashboard. After midnight, Abigail would already be in bed, and he didn't want to wake her. He'd be home before she woke up, but for some reason, he felt the urge to text his mom an "I love you." That was silly. He wasn't saying goodbye. He opened the door and climbed in the passenger seat. He grabbed the seatbelt, but before he clicked it, Jaren accelerated with unnecessary roughness. Treadon's heart clambered up into his throat and clung there like a clog in a chimney. He tried not to panic as he jammed the seatbelt into the latch, the comforting click allowing him a quick, shallow breath. Before Treadon could get up the courage to tell Jaren he'd changed his mind, he noticed 4 sets of lights turn on simultaneously at the far end of the parking lot. Jaren noticed too. Treadon saw his eyebrows come down as he glanced in the rearview mirror. Jaren drove through the neighborhood and then out onto a main street. They stopped at a red light. A red truck sped by with people hanging out the windows and standing in the bed. A police car drove through the intersection, lights flashing. There was a collective groan loud enough to reach them from a block away. Maybe this isn't the best time to go for a drive. Treadon hoped the words didn't squeak out the way they felt in his mind. Jaren let out a sigh. "You want me to take you home?" The disappointment in Jaren's voice tugged on the heart stuck in Jaren's throat. "You could crash at my house for the night. Gabe's out of town, so we have the extra futon." Jaren tapped the steering wheel. The light turned green at the same time as a couple SUVs reached the intersection. One pulled up to the side of Jaren's car, and 2 lined up behind them. There was a second where it felt like no one breathed. The windows were tinted on all the vehicles, and their license plates weren't visible. Treadon and Jaren shared a look. Well, Jaren shared a look with Treadon, and Treadon could read the words, loud and clear. "Hold on." Oh no. The tires squealed, and they hit 40 before they'd reached the other side of the intersection. Treadon was pressed back against the seat and gripped the seatbelt like a lifeline. His vision went dark and then flashed white as fear ripped through him. Maybe he would die tonight. He wished he'd texted his mom. The car beside them tried to keep pace, but another car in the other lane got in the way. The driver had to swerve while the car behind them stayed on their bumper. Jaren ran a stop sign as another SUV came from a side street and pulled even with the car still telling them. Jaren took a left. The SUVs followed. Treadon's normal panic from riding in a car was multiplied 1,000 times. His vision blurred and his breath came in short gasps. He had to swallow the nausea as Jaren swerved onto another street. Jaren swore. Are they cops? They would have their lights on by now. Treadon felt paralysis. Street lamps flashed overhead like a spinning disco ball. Who the hell are these guys? Jaren's head was tucked low. His movements were smooth and unpanicked. The only thing that kept Treadon from a full-fledged panic attack was the confidence in Jaren's driving. Jaren was welcoming the chase, enjoying it, like it gave him something else to focus on other than the problems with his dad. Jaren took a sharp turn into a parking lot and pulled behind a semi-truck before the following SUVs came around the corner. They watched through the wheels of the semi-truck. The SUVs passed them, but one stopped on the other side of the road and idled. Not cops. Jaren backed up, snapping Treadon forward so that he had to put his hands against the dashboard. Jaren spun the Aston Martin in a full donut, shooting smoke out from the squealing tires. He pulled out of the parking lot and past the parked SUV. Treadon could just make out the shape of a man through the tinted window. Same high-collared jacket. They followed us from the school. Treadon managed to gasp out. Talking helped him ground himself. He pushed the panic down. Another SUV ran a stop sign in front of them. "Look out," Treadon said. Jaren swerved to avoid a collision. Another SUV came out of nowhere, and Jaren had to drive up on the sidewalk, knocking over a street sign. The SUV drove up next to them as Jaren swerved back and forth on the sidewalk. The window rolled down, and the man driving the vehicle tilted his head to the side. An instant before Jaren swerved away, Treadon saw a black triangle tattoo on the man's neck, just above where the collar pulled away. "Who are these guys?" Jaren asked. "What the hell do they want?" Treadon didn't have an answer. Jaren swore under his breath and pulled into a completely deserted parking lot with an exit on the opposite side. He sped through and came out onto a one-way road. Before he could make it a block, 2 more SUVs were behind them. A third was coming up another street. Jaren was too fast. He turned before the SUV reached them, and all 3 vehicles had to swerve, squealing tires as they tried to intercept the fleeing Aston Martin. The next little while was a blur. Treadon lost track of time and direction. All he could do was cling to his seatbelt and yell out any time he saw another SUV coming at them. The fear was constant, his heart thundering like a crowd stomping in rhythm in a football stadium. Somehow his mind continued to function, and he started to notice patterns in the SUV's movements. Despite Jaren's excellent driving skills, the SUVs remained consistent, never getting too close, never losing track of the car. They weren't being forced into an accident. They were being herded, like sheep. Jaren was going exactly where they wanted him to. "Screw this," Jaren said as he floored the pedal and hit the on-ramp without slowing down. Treadon was too late to warn against it, but he knew this had been the SUV driver's intention all along. Jaren accelerated onto the highway, his fingers tight on the steering wheel. Once they were on the highway, 1 SUV stayed less than a car length behind. A second SUV pulled up on the right side of the car with a sudden burst of acceleration. As they rounded a curve, they found themselves behind another SUV, driving in front of them, waiting for them. The front SUV controlled the pace. The SUV to the side made it impossible for Jaren to change lanes. The one behind kept them from slowing down. The SUV beside them towered over the Aston Martin on Treadon's side, making him feel painfully exposed without the roof of the car for protection. They were trapped between the entourage of SUVs and the cement medium. Treadon's stomach dropped as the rear SUV sped up and rammed into the back of the convertible. Jaren's string of profanity evaporated into the air as the wind sucked the last bit of oxygen from Treadon's lungs. The panic overwhelmed him. He could hear the sounds from his nightmare, could feel the crushing pressure, could see the headlights swimming behind his vision. He could feel himself dying, even though they were still driving 90 miles an hour on a dark freeway. Jaren managed to keep control of the car and sped up to prevent another attack from the rear, but now they were inches from the SUV in front. Jaren's hands gripped his steering wheel. His eyes locked forward, a look of concentration carved into his features. The SUV in front increased their speed, and Jaren maintained the distance between them. The speedometer climbed past 150 miles per hour. Terror filled Treadon's mind. The unnatural escort extended for several rigid minutes. Jaren continued to control the steering wheel with a steel grip, his knuckles colorless, the veins in his forearms protruding like dark webs of pulsing energy. The scenery changed as they headed north on the 405. Away from the city and into the hills of North Los Angeles. The suburban houses gave way to industrial warehouses, and those were swallowed up by greenery, fields, and then shrubs and trees. The ground rose on both sides as they entered the canyon. The SUV on Treadon's side of the car moved in closer, leaving only inches between Treadon and the black reflective door paneling. Treadon turned his head away as the noise of the air being sucked between the 2 vehicles rose to a deafening scream. Jaren's face transformed. His concentration melted away, replaced by a frightening calm. His hands and arms remained flexed, but his face showed no strain as he closed his eyes. While driving, Treadon could only look at his own frightened reflection in the door of the SUV as it closed the gap and made contact, lights and colors swirling in the black paint. A deep rumbling came from below the car as the SUV squeezed the Aston Martin toward the cement medium. The roar of the rumble strip was overpowered with the sound of crunching metal and screaming tires. The SUV fell back, and Treadon saw the edge of the road approaching, the mountain rising to greet them. The SUV on the right hit one more time. Jaren jerked the wheel sharply, and Treadon's stomach lurched and dropped. The tires left the road. The car flipped up and over the guardrail. Silence engulfed Treadon's senses as the car rotated, and he found himself looking out into the deep darkness of the sky.